Welcome. I apologize for that. My name is Kate Schaefers, and I'm Executive Director of University of Minnesota Advanced Careers Initiative. I'm joined also with my colleagues, Sean Maurer and Jane Peterson. I invite you throughout the webinar to please ask questions. We want this to be a place where you can have your questions answered. We'll be using the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And also, if you're having any technical issues, you can use the chat to reach Sean Maurer and he'll help walk you through it. Let me also tell you Sean's email in case you prefer to use that. It's maure231@umn.edu. We started UMAC because we believe that universities should be places where people at various pivot points in their lives can come back to retool, to refresh, and to launch new chapters. And so we designed UMAC to help people at midlife and beyond navigate those transitions, to start new chapters, and to explore issues of purpose and social impact as they look at life after age 50. We have two options that we offer right now. One is UMAC Online, which is a two-part series that starts this January. And then we also have our UMAC Fellows program, which is a 9-month immersive fellowship that starts fall 2021. And I do want to mention that our 3 people that are on our panel today all participated in our Fellows program. We believe that people in this life stage, what Professor Phyllis Moen coined encore adulthood, have so much to offer to our workplace, to our college campuses, and to our communities. So our curriculum focuses on what people want in this life stage, maybe to work a little differently, new ways of working, meaningful work, paid or unpaid, while helping people make these pivots. Today, we're going to hear from 3 of our UMAC alumni who are going to share their stories of career shifts at midlife and beyond. We know that this isn't always easy, as we will hear today, and as I'm sure many of you have experienced as well. Yet when we hear from others, we can listen for lessons and apply them to our own lives. George Eliot once said, "It is never too late to be who you might have been." And I think we'll hear some of those themes in our discussions. So let me introduce our 3 panelists. Susan Gretz, at age 58, took a leap of faith, leaving a job that she held for 17 years to explore something new. She paused her career to take care of her mother and to renew and refocus. During this pause, she found work with a nonprofit where she had been volunteering, she did pro bono legal work, and she also volunteered in an animal shelter. And last July, Susan applied for and was hired into a government role that aligns with her passion for the environment. Diane Hageman enjoyed 35 plus years in communication, working in healthcare, education, and running her own consulting business. She was ready for a change. She used her time with UMAC to explore options and experiment with possible career directions. She found a new calling as Director of Fund Development at her local YMCA, supporting scholarships and programs through fundraising and events. In this role, Diane leverages her relationship building and communication skills while supporting her community. Carl Adamick has spent his career growing businesses and leading teams. A mission-driven executive, Carl prioritizes relationships, partnerships, and mentoring. Through UMAC, Carl volunteered in the classroom and helped nonprofit organization expand advocacy and education activities. Both of these experiences solidified his passion for working across generations and educational advocacy. As he considers his encore, he's exploring ways to get more involved with work at the intersection of climate change and education. Welcome, Susan, Diane, and Carl. I'm so glad to have you here with our discussion today. I'd like to start with just a general question, and I'll ask each of you individually this question, but what motivated you to make a career shift? And Diane, let's start with you.
Well, Kate, thanks for the great question. In terms of my motivation for a career shift, it was probably 7 or 8 years ago that I was in a communications field, and I think one of the motivations was social media was really getting more and more of a big thing in the communications arena, and it was just, I have personal pages, it was just not something that I wanted to do as part of a career. And I just historically changed. I didn't work for one place for 35 years. Every 5 to 7 years, I kind of switched it up. 15 years in healthcare on my own, then 5 to 7 years, or actually 8 years in a college setting. That was, so what was happening in my field was a motivating factor. And then another really big thing about 6 years ago was elder care. My father just had a major medical thing happen in 2014, and he did pass away in 2018. So that absolutely was an underlying factor. And I just knew I needed to make a change, and fundraising was always kind of in the back of my head. I supported it, a lot of campaigns in communication. So it seemed like a natural progression.
Yeah, and it sounds like your life shifted as well as your field shifted, and this just kind of seemed like a way to pursue
Up on actually Friday, I will be a 30-year member of this YMCA. So when this position opened up in fundraising, it just seemed to be a great way to align a new career with a place that matters greatly to me.
Yes. Yeah. And Susan, so you left a position that you had been in for a number of years, and really left with nothing lined up at the time. So can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to do that?
Yeah, I was looking at sort of my trajectory and where might have ended up in my whole career, and deciding that I really wanted to do something else. I wasn't quite sure what that was. And I also noticed that I was passing up opportunities in my current job and not taking advantage of what was there, and that I was being asked to do. And I thought, I don't want to become that crabby person at work that no one wants to talk to. I want to stay engaged. And so I really needed to explore what else was out there. On some level, I felt like I had already begun maybe the emotional and mental process of leaving that job in a way. And that wasn't fair to my employer to stay there, given that that's sort of what I was thinking. So it was a big jump. It was definitely a pushing myself out of the nest sort of situation. And I was fortunate to be able to do it with the help of UMAC. But it was just a time to explore, I felt. So
Yeah.
Time to go.
And it is really hard, because I think a lot of people often stay too long. I mean, when they're ready to leave, but maybe some of the fear keeps them in positions.
That's right. Yep, definitely.
And Carl, you're in a different situation, because you're still active in your career. You know, you've got kind of a trajectory still, but you've been putting into place some stepping stones for yourself. Could you talk a little bit about what's been motivating you for that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Kate, to your first point, I'm very happy in the career I'm in. I'm challenged. I'll be doing it a few more years. But I have other interests that at some point I not only want to invest a little bit, but I'd like to invest a significant part of my life into those things. But the stepping stones, as you mentioned, was really trying to figure out what that was going to be, sort of really cohesively make a decision of what pathway I wanted to take. So I wanted to give myself time to really look broadly of around interests I already have and what's out there. Would it lead to a career change at some point? Would it be something that would complement other things I want to do with my life? And also, I knew that if I was going to do something completely different than what I'm doing today, I need to learn about it. I need to create network and so on. So the bottom line was, I felt it was important that I allow myself time to go through that process. And I'm right in the middle of it right now. I think I'm getting to a place that I've got some clarity in a direction I want to take. And I think we might talk about that a little later, Kate. But Susan and Diane and I participated in the UMAC program a couple of years ago. So it's been 2 years, and that's been a good tool in really helping me shape to the place I am now to really start investing time in the pathway I want to take.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it also seems like making a career change takes a level of courage. I mean, whether it is a leap of faith or starting a new career where you're really, new into the role. And so, you're leaving some of the expertise you had in a field, but starting something new, or also to stretch yourself. So I wonder, let's start with you, Susan, about just the courage that it took to do that and what that meant for you.
Well, I feel very privileged to have been in a position where I mean, health insurance is so critical. I was fortunate that I could maintain health insurance through my spouse, and so that I was able to leave my job and to take that time really to get some mental clarity. And I think there's something about this, the uncluttered mind that gets a little more creative. And what I found really critical about the UMAC program is all of the wonderful readings that you and the other leaders of the program curated. And so that it sort of, I felt like my thought process was being nurtured along the way, so that I could think about really, where am I now? Who am I now? You go through your life for many years on a career trajectory, and it's so great to be able to take a pause and say, what are my interests now? Does that interest maybe lead me in a different direction or not? In my situation, taking that pause and getting the kind of the camaraderie of the UMAC program and through the readings and thinking about where I'd been, I came back to this environmental issues really still being at the core of what I wanted to do, and still being really reflective of where I wanted to devote my energies. And so even though someone looking at my resume and seeing what I've done might say, well, that was maybe just a job change, for me it felt very different, because when you're over 50 and you're thinking about a big change, any job change I think is significant. And I also think it was affirming for me to, like I say, go back and evaluate and say, yeah, that really is a core value of mine and something I want to pursue. So having made and gotten some skills refreshed through the UMAC program about how to do LinkedIn and making some connections among my cohort there at UMAC, I was able to actually to have I'm on my second job since leaving that position. And it's all an experiment. And I think that's part of the thought process, or thing I came to accept, was that every major job change really is an experiment, and I may have to try 2 or 3 different things before I find something that really fits. And so that, I think for me, was having the readings from UMAC, the support of the cohort, wonderful people like Carl and Diane, who are at the same stage in life and also exploring, that was just really supportive. So that was what really helped me.
I'm also hearing too the importance of creating space in your life to step back and look at what it is you're looking for, what it is you're hoping for. And for you, I mean, you ended up coming full circle, but with a different kind of focus. I mean, just focusing and clarity, and maybe also just validating some of the thoughts you were having with that, and having, the ability to do that and to carve out some time in your life. Also, when your mother was dying too, so it was a time of shifting in general. And so, creating that space seems to have been really important for you.
Yeah, definitely. And to have a caregiver role for many years in my life and then not having that anymore, it's just was part of a large transition that was going on in my life. And it's all worked out really wonderfully. And I think I'm starting, although I've come full circle and I'm still practicing law in an environmental area, it's in energy law, which is, as many people know, law is so specialized that any new area is a big change. And I'm very excited about it. So it's all worked out great. Very lucky.
And Diane, you came in, I mean, you obviously, you built a career and a reputation, you have these amazing skills, but you started again in a new kind of role. Could you talk a little bit about and I think that was kind of a courageous thing too, to be a learner or new to a field. Could you talk a little bit about that, Diane?
Absolutely. So yes, I'm 14 months into this. And I kind of joke with my supervisor, my boss, who's about 8-9 years younger than me. I'm just a toddler. I'm just a 25-year-old in fundraising, and he laughs because, some of the skills that I had and I'm in the St. Cloud area, and just have a really strong network. But you know, so I joke on the one side because all the experience and communications background, being able to use that in terms of creating content and communication plans for fundraising, like, and having the connections, but yet the strategy piece of learning that, which, you know, I'm still learning, boy. It's not this, but it's definitely up. And then, you know, certainly the technology piece of learning a software alongside an assistant that, you know, was hired about a year before so, you know, those are definitely pieces. And for me, you know, speaking to the rest of you on the screen, in terms of technology, I am married to a software engineer. And on the one hand, it's a lovely thing. And on the other hand, it was almost enabling. And so I really had to make an attitude adjustment. I did it when I was still at St. Ben's, but that, boy, you gotta be okay with embracing the technology piece. It's not something that I would, that I love, because I always joke to people, my biggest asset is right here. It's my mouth, it's talking. And so the computer, but it is something I just tell myself every day, okay, you got to learn this. You got to figure out how to do it and get comfortable with it. So that's been a big piece for me, is embracing how to use the technology tools in fundraising, and then just the strategy part that I'm, you know, consistently talking to my boss about, and other colleagues, other development colleagues in the St. Cloud area.
And what I'm also hearing, Diane, too, and I think this is a really common experience for people, is it's also, you are leveraging those skills that you built across your career. And Susan, you as well, and you, Carl, as well, too. But it isn't, you know, sometimes we talk about reinvention, and I think that's not quite the right word to capture it, because I do think you're building on that past and those skills that you bring, but then you're also layering on some new applications and some new skills. And that's part of the exciting piece of it, maybe, or also just part of the challenging piece of it. And Carl, how about you? I mean, so as you're looking at leveraging your skills for what's next, and, you know, just stretching, what's your story with that?
Yeah, so you know, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted the opportunity to start broad in a discovery basis, and then ultimately bring it narrow and narrower as I go along. And I think just in general, the skill sets that I developed in my career, there's certainly those that are practical to my specific career, but they're the intangibles that I think bring value to other pathways. And I think certainly a key benefit that participating in the UMAC program brought to me was, how can I kind of bring together those different thoughts of directions? I'm a linear thinker by nature. How can I line them up? And then the practical exercises to use of pursuing. And with that is identifying new things that I may not have thought about before that are of interest, and in some cases developing passion about. And, you know, I've tried different things in the past 4 years, from working with a nonprofit in global education curriculum to bring to public school systems in the US and developing content. Was working with a nonprofit in the affordable housing arena, again on the education side, and developing training programs for their volunteers, while working with my public school systems foundation. So a lot of it was education related. One of the key things that really sort of confirmed one of my 2 steps of pathway I'm going to look forward to now is the value of intergenerational experiences. With UMAC, I participated in one of the U's World Challenges courses, and participated in a small group learning activity with 4 19-year-old undergraduates, which I could probably make a good argument that I got a lot more value out of that experience than the undergraduates had engaging with me. But I really appreciated that experience, which has led to this. I want to seek opportunities of intergenerational learning and experiences as I move forward. And then the other thing that I've learned is, again, those experiences over a lifetime, and in particular, taking schooling and career to informal conversations with my wife and my children about things. That the other piece of it is, I've come to a place that climate and its preservation is pretty important in the direction that I take. And so I'm at a place now where I've taken all of that, used the development skills, and as Susan said earlier, the resources that were made available to me and my teammates as part of the UMAC program. And now I'm looking forward and moving ahead of that alignment of climate preservation and intergenerational experiences, and determining what that can look like as I look to the future.
You know, Carl, as you talk about that intergenerational piece, I know a real common theme that we have heard from all of our fellows is just how powerful it is to have conversations that matter with young adults and to build those bridges, because, you know, higher ed is one of these institutions that tends to cater to the 18 to 22-year-old. Yet we also know that people across their lifespan have interest in, as well as need for, coming back to campus or coming back to learning to help them prepare for what's next. And when we look at our workplaces, you know, we have 5 generations in the workplace today. And so we know that people are going to be working on intergenerational teams in the workplace. In the classroom, it's really just enhancing when we can bring those opportunities. And I know too, I mean, Diane, now you work with a really young team, isn't that right? How is that, what is that experience like?
Well, yes, there is. YMCAs are often a college or a high school job or early career. And it was interesting, and I did see a question in the chat about age discrimination. So as I went through the interview process, I wondered, you know, and I knew my boss because I had been on the board here, but he made a comment that in terms of YMCAs, they try to have about a third of people, I think, in that 45 to 65, and then maybe a third in the 35 to 45, and then, you know, 18 to 35 and a third. They try to, it's a purposeful thing that Ys do, which I had no idea. So when he said that during my interview, I was like, okay, he's actually seeing my generation as expanding, you know, his base here within the management team. That's who, you know, the managers here. So I think it helped rounds it out, and that our finance director is my same age, so we commiserate once in a while. But otherwise, we've got, you know, quite a broad thing. Our front desk and upstairs and the fitness staff, so many of them are the younger people, and I just really enjoy visiting with them. I had come from, you know, spent 8 years at a women's college setting, so it was nice to come back to that. And we do have rotated shifts in at the front desk just to kind of understand what that whole process is with our members. And so, of course, you're sitting side by side. I would like to, if I could, take a moment to just share kind of a cool story regarding that. I had worked with a young man a few Saturdays ago, probably a month or so ago. And I kept saying, Cam, you're just saving me here with all these calls and learning things, because we are doing a matching campaign right now for the end of the year because our Y is closed right now. He came to me and he started asking me questions about it. And he started talking to his dad. And that was over the course of a few days. Long story short, this 20-year-old young man is giving and he is okay with me talking about it, a $300 gift to our Y, which his parents are more than matching. And they're going to be $1,000, which will then be matched by this other one. So so he is having this huge impact, and just being able to talk to him about that and recognition and just planting the seeds of philanthropy, like, what an awesome, you know, young person story. I mean, and he's just such a smart young man, and just, we're lucky to have him on staff. So that's just been a very, very recent example, just the last week.
I love that story too, that he's also talking with his parents about philanthropy and building that into his life at this young age, which is
And they're encouraging it. Like that discussion was, I don't know how they came up with the figures, but you know, they're encouraging him as well. So he was kind of getting it on both sides.
Yeah. So let's pause here a moment. And Jane, I know that you've been checking the questions that have come in, and it sounds like Diane has as well. So Jane, you want to share start with some of the questions that we've been getting?
Certainly. The one is, did you encounter the age discrimination? And if so, how did you handle it? And another one is about their experiences in the job market as a 50-something. How do you feel you have been regarded in this respect?
Mm-hmm. Great questions. And I know that, for many of us, being on the job market in our 50s or 60s is kind of a terrifying thing. And so, Diane, I think your experience was a little unusual in the sense that your manager was looking specifically for age diversity on the team. But I wonder, Susan, do you want to share your experience of applying for jobs at this life stage and what that was like?
Yeah, I wanted to be to make sure that I got rid of my own ways of talking about being at this age. So I really wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be a technological barrier. I wasn't going to feed into a stereotype of people at this age not being technologically savvy. So I spent a lot of time, and thank goodness there's a YouTube video for everything. So when I was applying for the first position I took with this young, small nonprofit organization, they used the whole Google suite, which I wasn't familiar with at the time, but I took the time to learn it and get conversant in it and make sure that I could honestly say, I got that, I can do that, And then I think the other part of it was, acknowledging and being upfront where I'm a learner, as Diane has said. I think that acknowledging where you may need a little more background and the strengths and then also saying where the strengths are, is appreciated in the interview setting. And so where I could specifically say, well, I haven't done that area of law before, but here are the things that I have learned. And fortunately, I have had a pretty diverse legal background. So I had a demonstrated track record of being able to learn new areas of law. And I use that to try to help promote myself, I think, in those positions. But I do, you can read articles about how, your resume might get rejected if you have 2 spaces after a period, because that's from an older generation's way of doing things compared to the new. And, there's a lot of information out there, including a lot that we got through the UMAC program about how to sort of address potential age discrimination and how to, we hate to say brand yourself because that feels like you're marketing, but that's kind of what you're doing. So I think it helped me to have a little bit of a refresher in those areas as well through UMAC. And, fortunately, like Diane's situation, I don't know that these organizations were specifically deliberate about age groups, but I do think that they were both young teams looking for some experience. And so I was really fortunate in that respect as well.
And it also sounds like you kind of disrupted some of the narrative around, because you're 50-something or that you don't know technology. So you made sure that you were up on it. And, one of the things that I also think we all need to be aware of is we're all behind in technology. I mean, no one's up on every kind of tool that's out there. And so it is that, taking that step and making sure that you know what is needed for that job, and then also just telling that story about how you can learn for those pieces that are new. Carl, what thoughts do you have about ageism?
Yeah, and there's actually, I saw a question directed to me in the chat, which I'll address with that too, Kate. So it's interesting, as I mentioned at the outset, I'm still well entrenched in the career I've been in a number of years and enjoying it and so on. What I'm seeing in my industry is a generational transition in terms of leadership. And, we talk about, one of the questions we talked with Kate prior to this webinar is, who has managers or leaders younger than them. And I'm seeing that evolution as part of it. What I am also seeing, however, is a growing sensitivity to the issue of ageism. In other words, that it's not just oh gosh, it's a box on a checklist that we've got to check off, but it is a legitimate sensitivity to, we really have an opportunity here of a broadening pool of resources. And why would we want to ignore this pool of resources that has vast experiences, whether or not they have specific experience in what we do as an organization? They bring talent and skill sets. I would argue that at least in the industry that I'm in, we're not fully there yet, but I think it's a positive evolution to that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll switch gears a moment and I'll address the chat question, which had to do in my intergenerational interests and partnerships. Has there been thought process in terms of youth of color as part of that? And I will say the answer is yes, but it isn't a specific intent. It's just, I mentioned earlier, one of the things I did as a volunteer was working with a global education curriculum nonprofit, where they develop and manage the curriculum, and then they go to public school systems in the United States that may have gaps in global education, and they plug it in and the school system will subscribe to it. And out of that, the real opportunities that I learned in that environment were in school systems that were primarily kids of color, or there was a good mix across the spectrum. A particular opportunity that I'll be pursuing here this month in the city that I live in, one of the is a sustainability commission newly created by the city, and the criteria that they're looking at in filling this, there's going to be 5 adult commissioners and 2 youth. And the mission of the city is to make sure that all the commissions and committees within the city represent the overall makeup of the city. And with that, there is a concerted effort relative to not just with the adults, but the students that will be participating, that we are truly reflecting the community, which will bring in youth of color. That was one of the primary things that has interested me in pursuing this particular position. So I hope that answers the question that was asked by the individual.
Well, and just to add to that too, when we look at sheer demographics, as we look at our older population in Minnesota, we do have, a higher percentage of white people in that demographic. But when you look at Gen Z, we have a huge proportion of Gen Z are young adults of color. And so when you look at our college campuses, when you look at what our future is holding, we are multicultural, multiracial, intergenerational. I mean, those connections across all of those areas is going to be critically important as we're looking at anything that we do. And I'm sure, Diane, with the why work, I'm sure that's a huge foundation as well on some of your work.
Yes, it is. And we, within our staff, do work to have our staff reflect our community, and we're still working on that. We certainly, and now, again, closed for the second time, some of these kids come back, and not all of them do, but anyway, yeah, and reflective of the St. Cloud area. We have a pretty significant Somali population here, and we have a number of staff members, young men and women, but there's more work to be done on it, and we know that.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
Kate, if I could just add one thing to your conversation stream about intergenerational is I currently formally mentor 3 people in our company, ranging from ages of 24 to 36. And this came out of one of the readings we did as part of the UMAC program. But from that, these 3 mentoring relationships I have, when they approached me to do it, I wanted them to present what they wanted to get out of it, what they were looking for me. But one of the criteria that I required of them was that I wanted it to be a 360 mentorship, that I also wanted to have them in the mentor role in the relationship, because there are so many things that I can learn and have the opportunity to develop that they bring from, Susan's comment about technology is certainly one big thing, but just sort of the general thought process of life and business and what they're doing in many ways is different than how I approach things. And it's been a huge value.
And I think valuing what every person has to bring, no matter their age, no matter their young adult status or their older adult status. I mean, having something to bring and something to learn from each other, I think is really powerful. I'd like to just do one more discussion around that ageism. So none of you really talked a lot about just how you leveraged your networks or your connections. And I wonder if that was part of how, for you, Diane and Susan, how you ended up making some of those changes. And Carl, too, for you, for creating some new opportunities for yourself. So who'd like to start? Susan, I see you.
Yeah, I have to say, when I came into the program, I didn't think I had a network. I mean, I hadn't looked for a job for 15 years, and the whole the revolution of job hunting through things like LinkedIn and making those professional connections and informational interviews for things you wanted to do was just a foreign land to me. So my process really did need to be sort of learning how the new job, process worked, essentially, and learning that it is through those network connections that we've had, that of course I had accumulated over the years of working in this community, but maybe just needed to sit down and reflect a little bit on what connections there were. And having volunteered for the one organization, that turned into a job. And then for my current role, having an informational interview initially, which was very helpful to make one connection, and then just using other people in the legal community to maybe just introduce me to someone was very helpful. And I think this is not necessarily on the job front, but just the UMAC program, by having this cohort of people that we came to know and came to kind of bring into our own lives, it opens up another whole network for you. I mean, there's kind of a funny story where I think we were maybe 1 or 2 weeks into the program and was having a conversation with one of our colleagues, and we were thinking about where we might do this internship, and she mentioned, there's this organization that she has admired for many years, and she would love to find a way into that, and she was specifically kind of interested in an HR role. And sure enough, I knew somebody who worked in HR in that organization, set her up with an information session, and that turned out to be her opportunity. And so there's serendipity, of course, in life in lots of different ways, but I think to work in a group like the UMAC cohort, where we can kind of feed off each other idea-wise, and then also that opened up some connections, I think, for other people, that was really valuable as well.
And maybe also opens up connections with people who may see you for who you're becoming in addition to who you've been. So it's leveraging those existing connections, networks that you have, but then also creating new ones that help you move in that direction.
Definitely.
Diane, do you have thoughts about networks?
Well, that just with communications and my just general nature, networking has been a huge part of my existence for a long time. But to the point of this position, probably about 15 years ago, when I was doing independent consulting, I got very heavily involved in a number of community organizations. And was served on committees and boards, like the Chamber, like the Y, like my kids' Catholic High School Foundation. And boy, I will tell you, those connections come back in many, many ways. One, just great friendships come out of it. But as I've come back in here now as a staff role, I mean, 3 or 4 of the calls in the last few days were people that I met the first time, you know, when I was on the board here from 2002 to 11, you know, and reconnecting that way. It's been a lot of fun. So you just never know. Like, you know, Susan said, some of it's the serendipity of it all, and it's fun. You know, and I think for my boss, because I had the connections of that, not a full generation above, but just the next, you know, layer up, you know, we're finding that to be advantageous as well, just in terms of giving. And, you know, I'm not 65, but 65, you know, the older donors as well, that's, you know, I can speak to them very easily. Yeah, so that networking, yeah, it's just critical. And mine, and my boss has even said, I don't even think we've begun to tap, you know, the full potential on your network.
Yeah, and some of that was just volunteering for things you cared about. So getting engaged with things that matter to you, and then building networks that also are supportive as you look at different ways to move in your career. Carl, do you have any thoughts to add about networking?
Yeah, just a couple things. So I think the networking component was one of the real motivators for me to join the UMAC program, because in my career, though I'm based here in the Twin Cities, the preponderance of my business activities, all of my employees except one are outside of the state, primarily on East and West Coast, along with our business. And prior to COVID, I traveled a lot, and we'll probably get back to travel at some level when we're past this. But that said, that left me with one avenue of a very limited network here in the Twin Cities in terms of business and industry. I've certainly got friends in my participation in some volunteerism efforts over the years, partly, but that was frankly a big gap. And so that was a motivator in pursuing the UMAC program. The second piece I would talk about is, you know, I told you earlier about sort of the stepping stones of really going broad and coming and giving my opportunity to look around. It was a piece of giving myself time to develop networks too. And so as I get into this intergenerational alignment with climate, I'm now at the base step of the development of network in that regard. And I wanted to give myself the time to be able to do that.
Well, and just also to add to that, I know our undergraduate students have told us about how valuable it is for them to get to know you all. And especially for our first generation students who may not have those professional networks that are easily accessible in their lives, and being able to be mentored by someone who brings the kind of experience that might also open up ideas about what they might do is just so helpful for students. So also when we look at issues of equity, helping to lift up people who may not necessarily have those professional networks and helping them create them as part of their learning experience, I think is one of the legacies of our UMAC fellows in the classroom. And I think those relationships can be really powerful. So Jane, let's pause here again and see, are there pressing questions that that we haven't addressed yet, or things that you might want to bring up at this point?
There are two issues. One is to still talk about the networks and how that process went for people. And then the other is talking more about your core values, and were you surprised as you did the self-reflection in those core values?
Mm-hmm. So let's start maybe with the core values. And who would like to start talking about, you know, what you found out about yourself through this?
Well, I'll take a shot at it. I'll focus on one thing, and forgive me, Kate, I don't remember the book. It was one of the books we got through UMAC that I read, but a quote that really stuck with me, that from a value perspective, I struggled through, but I'm in a good place now, is the quote was, "It's okay to be the dumbest person in the room." And I sort of had this value set that if I was new to something, I want to be prepared to be as good as or as close to as smart as the person with the highest expertise in the room, because I wanted to be able to bring value to that conversation, to the discussion, and help us move forward. And so in this new adventure that at least I'm progressing through, I'm going to a place that, though I have a foundation of skill sets that I can bring to it, I'm brand new to the game, and I have to be okay that I'm brand new. And that took some time. That, you know, it's okay to learning is a value, and I value learning, and it's okay for me to be at the beginning of the learning journey. So that was a big piece for me.
Mm-hmm. And also maybe it's okay to stumble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You kind of have to get over yourself.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah,
maybe
a level
kind
of
of
humility, right?
every day sometimes that happens, but yeah. Because you know, back to the ageism question, and I know there was one in the chat. I do think things happen. Well, for one, to the point of the class, I'm going to cover two things. Participating in Phyllis' class was a highlight for me, and being with those students and in those groups, like that was just really neat. And I hope for the folks that are considering it for the 22-23 that that's an option, again, because it's just so valuable. But then two, I do think whether we realize it or not, all of us are ageist. I think we put ourselves in a category, you know, and we kind of joke, my colleague and I, you know, that we're the old ones or whatever. Like, we just have to be so careful. And even with some of our younger staff, I don't think it's intentional at all, but I do think that they make assumptions, you know, particularly around technology. And in my case, you know, there's some validity because I'm still learning it. So that's something that I think about and work on, you know, regularly. And, you know, it hasn't come up as a discussion here, but, you know, that's just something I think in our society in general, that we are ageist, both us towards the youngsters or ourselves, you know, and upward. And that just really being aware of that, and trying to help change it.
Well, and I think for all of you too, starting something new at this life stage is also disrupting some of those ideas about, you know, getting to a certain age and just coasting to retirement, or, you know, not necessarily wanting to learn or challenge yourself. I mean, those are part of ageist ideas that we have, that I think when you stop and look around, and, you know, we certainly see it with you all, but I think we see it everywhere, that there's people that want to start something new. They want to work, but maybe in a different way. They want to contribute. So there's so many ways that I think the reality of what people are looking for don't fit old stereotypes of what we think about what it means to be in your 50s and 60s and 70s. And so I think it is a disruption there. Susan, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the kind of mentoring. It's a mix of mentoring and networking. You know, my new boss that I have, one of our early conversations talking about goals and where we wanted to be. And you know, as I say, I have just been totally upfront about the areas in which I'm a learner. And I was so appreciative that we were talking about some sort of management type issue. And she said, well, you know, you probably have more management experience than I do, which is probably true, but how wonderful for her to recognize that and to see that as something that maybe we can learn from each other in this area. So I just feel like the workplace now, and maybe I've just been incredibly fortunate, but I feel like there's intergenerational mentorship going on, up, down, sideways, and maybe that's a new work ethic, and maybe that's something refreshing and new that young people bring. And I know that I've really tried, whenever a younger person has wanted to talk with me about my career or ideas that I might have if they want to pursue a particular direction, I really always try to be willing to have those conversations. And I think, one of the things we talked about in UMAC is like, how to do that 20-minute informational interview and not take too much of that person's time and have it be productive and for both parties. And I've really found that to be valuable, both on the receiving end and the giving end. So I think that's been helpful for me. And I think a core value in evaluating, again, what was really motivating for me in whether it's in the environmental field or other possibilities, other places I might go, I feel like I have the skills, for however long my current position lasts and is great. I feel like if I'm ready to make another change in 5 or 10 years, I have those readings that I'm going to hang on to, and I have a core group of people, the UMAC program alumni, if you want to call it, from our group. We try to have lunch or have a Zoom call once a month just to kind of check in. And sometimes it's a couple people and sometimes it's more than that. We don't all make it. But I'm hoping to maintain that connection for a long, long time, because I feel like that's a supportive group that knows me and knows what those core values are, and is going to help me make this transition for the hopefully decades that I'll be staying engaged. So it wasn't just a one-off kind of, this helped me get this new job. I really feel like it's a life skill that we're all going to need, for as long as we want to stay engaged, which is hopefully forever, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm hearing too that all of you have talked about being generous with your time, and generous in doing informational interviews, looking at an informational interview as a time for you to get information, but also to give back. So it's relationship building. I mean, even a 20-minute informational interview can also be a relationship building kind of experience. And, if it's also volunteering in your community, and you've all done that. I mean, you've all gotten engaged in those ways, but it's about learning how to continue to grow and continue to develop networks, and to have them be based on generosity, as well as valuing the other person that you're informational interviewing with. So I know that we are coming up on the end of this, so I would like to ask each of you if you have any advice for people who are thinking about making a career change after age 50. So Susan, why don't we start with you?
Don't think about it too much. Just do it. No, I realized that I was very fortunate in my situation to be able to make a change in which I took some time back to reflect. But I guess my suggestion would be to get out there and start talking with people and networking. My experience has been that people are very interested and willing to talk about their careers and how they got where they are. And even just sort of making that initial, request for an interview or talking over the phone, however it might be. We're not doing coffee anymore in coffee shops, but I think that just starting that process and maybe just say in the next month, I'm going to contact 3 different people, and just to explore what they're doing and how they got there, and just start with a few steps like that to recognize and build that network. That would be my advice.
And Diane, how about you?
I would say give yourself some grace. Some of us track on the perfectionistic side, and so if you're going to do something different, you are starting over, and so you are a learner at a different point in your life, and so I always caught on to things super quickly, and so just having to kind of retool and do that is I think important. And I saw a chat question in there too about someone has kind of a lot going on personally, and is looking at a new job. Again, give yourself some grace and get sleep. I just really find, because the mental, for me anyway, the mental energy of learning this whole new thing, and it's certainly better in year 2, because now I have a whole, that's what I kept saying to my boss, I have a whole, I want to get this year behind me to understand the cycles. But it's, there are days I was exhausted, and there's still days So again, it just comes back to give yourself grace and get sleep, at least for me.
Self-care, absolutely. We all need that today. Carl, how about you?
I would say be open to learning, be open to anything. You may find yourself in a conversation with somebody you've known for years or somebody you've just met that is going to trigger a thought that excites you that you may never have thought of before. Just be very open-minded. And the other thing I'd add to that, and I think this kind of plays into what both Susan and Diane said too, it's not a race. It really, if you have the opportunity, really look at, is this something that I'm passionate about? Is this exciting? Do I want to invest the time and effort to pursue? Allow yourself to think that. But again, I think for me, the big thing is be open, because something could come from someplace you never expect.
Mm-hmm. And the other theme that I'm hearing from all of you also is that, you know, it's not like you're going to be done with this. I mean, it is developing skill sets so that you can make pivots at other points in your life, and feeling confident in being able to manage some of those transitions. So anything, Jane, do you have anything else before we wrap up?
People were interested in, and we've talked a little bit about it, the UMAC alums and how they stay in touch with each other. Is there a Facebook page, LinkedIn? How do we do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do have a LinkedIn page. And as Susan said too, our cohorts have gotten together for this cohort that these 3 people are in. They have a monthly meeting. We have also invited people back to campus to meet our new fellows. Now, we don't have a fellow group this year because of COVID, and we obviously are not gathering in person, but the idea is that we have some shared experiences, and so we encourage people to connect across cohorts. And we also have built relationships, you know, with people that go beyond just the cohort, but people in the university community and some of the young adult students. And so we see this as a community building effort to look at connecting people who want to make a difference in their communities with people who are living some of those transitions, and to be able to learn from each other along the way. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. As I said, we will be sending this out as a recording, and I just wish the best for all of you as you're navigating your transitions. And please do reach out if you have any questions about us. We're happy to connect and answer your questions and help you figure out what resources you need. So thank you so much, and thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.